of the things I want to mention about this is these scenes that string bigger scenes together. It's interesting how most readers or viewers or what have you often take for granted the bigger scenes and only evaluate a book or a film or a painting or what have you just based on the grandness of one aspect of it. For instance, in 2001, you always get praise about the Stargate sequence, but you never have in most reviews any conversation whatsoever about the little scenes where they're eating or the scenes where they're talking about the mission to Jupiter and anything like that, which are key scenes that link together other scenes. Even though they're small and they seem insignificant, they're bridges to the next idea.
Yeah, and I don't think you can have throwaway in a work of art. Um, my I think I've mentioned this before. If you were to compare my writing to paintings, they would be these big Hudson School Valley paintings where you have great detail of big things, but you also have, say, a farmer and his donkey in the forefront underneath a volcano that's maybe 10 miles away. Um, that's why I will have little scenes. I think the only time, for example, you hear the twins, the Vincetti twins, the youngest twins speak, is at the end when they're adults and Dino has a conversation with one of them. One of them dies of AIDS, I believe, and the other twin, it's the only spot where they speak. But you, the thing too, though,
Well,
is
there is some scenes too where they speak that come off to Manny as very strange, where they're watching television and they
oh
have
yeah,
this, that annoying twin thing where they talk at the same time and
yeah.
everything. So there are some scenes of that, but it just shows how they're the least fleshed out of the main characters, but it's intentional that way.
Yeah, and a thing too, though, you have to know with your characters when you can give more of them and when you need to let go. I've talked about, like in the books, Big Frank appears in this book, and he's a central character in the next book, A Norwegian in the Family. But I have to let him go because the more you find out about him, the less mystery he has. Um, Within the books too, you can't tell too much about people. For example, later on in the book, you find out the saloon keeper. We find out, for example, that he has bats that are signed by famous baseball players, and I think he has one scene where it's maybe a Hank Greenberg signed bat. Uh, and so that's an interesting character trait. We know that he's boned Angela Vincetti. We know that he's a scumbag. We know whatever. But to tell too much about him would probably lessen the character because he'd probably become too generic if you told too much. So his one character trait of having these signed bats for Major League Baseball players of the 20s and 30s is the thing that makes him a little bit more interesting. We don't get that much, for example, of Rocco Vincetti. Uh, we have him early on in one or two scenes where he basically says, "No, Dad Vito, meaning Vito, is a bad guy because Gino has a little bit of, if not hero worship. Gino wants to be like both Rocco and uh, Vito and follow their footsteps into the mob, which he does. But Rocco has at least the presence of mind that my life is shit and don't be like that. But there's not that he served in a sense. He's a character that serves that purpose. But on the other hand, if I were to try to get too into him, he'd probably be generic because he's clearly not as psychopathic as Gino. He's more of a generic character. He's certainly not as weak as Aldo, and he's certainly not as normal though, since he's in jail as Dino. So the three most interesting brothers, as it may be, are the psychopath, the weakling, and the semi-normative Dino. The rest of the brothers, one becomes a pedophile and he's off camera for most of his adult life. We just find out that he's involved in some kind of scandal, whatnot, years later. The one brother's in jail, and I think he may die in jail. Vito ends up dying in jail. The two twins, one of them dies of AIDS, and I think the other one may die during 9/11 or something. But so you don't want to tell too much. So Angela is probably the female character that's plumbed the most, both literally and narratively. Um, but
That
you
was a nice pun.
yeah, you don't want to tell too much about her though, and a lot of her is going to be a stereotype, but you don't want to indulge the stereotype because yeah, she's the Italian mama, but she's also a neglectful mother because she's poor. She fucks around or whatnot. She sticks with a psychopath. These are all things that could easily make her a caricature. So you have to give her in a little bit of doses when you have a character like that.